Now, there's no question that the Nothing Phone 2A has style unlike any other $350 smartphone out there. It's definitely different, and that's a huge asset, but that style comes with a trade-off that's impossible to ignore. Nothing's first foray into the mid-tier market is no doubt very impressive. Now, one thing is really important to remember here, though. There are always trade-offs to be made in this category, especially with a $350 price point. The question always is, did they make the right trade-offs? And really, that depends on who you ask and what they value in a smartphone. This is my take on the Nothing Phone 2A. Now, design-wise, this is a mid-tier phone that looks unlike any other you're going to find. Nothing's brand of transparent design, as you can see, is smartly intact here. It's a plastic casing instead of glass, which I think is a smart cost savings move. It helps it retain the style of the flagship with minimal trade-off in material. Glass often feels very different from plastic, but I actually had a hard time telling the difference between this and the glass on the 2. The design underneath is interesting to scan over, though a bit difficult to see on the black version that I have. I'm trying to get the light just right here. That little red square that you can kind of see right there doesn't really serve a purpose. It's purely aesthetic. And the glyph LEDs are stripped down to 3 different zones this time, another trade-off which I'm going to discuss in a little bit. Now, the camera bump is centered, and I actually personally, I appreciate that sort of touch. It keeps the phone from wobbling when it's on a table. When I set it down, it's very stable and sturdy. It doesn't rock when I'm interacting with it, which is a really nice feature. I also like things that look nice and symmetrical, and the camera bump definitely achieves that. And yes, as Nothing likes to point out, they do kind of look like eyes staring back at you, which, by the way, that's actually surrounded by the NFC coil. So that's what you see in there, that circular design inside. Now, the frame itself is a textured plastic that covers the aluminum frame that you don't see, that's kind of hidden underneath. And honestly, I couldn't even tell for the longest time that this was plastic, and I'm kind of questioning my plastic dar as a result. Upon dropping the device, there were a few indentations that appeared that made it a little more obvious, but still not too bad. And finally, this thing, if you haven't already noticed, loves to collect fingerprints. So you're probably going to be wiping this sucker off pretty frequently if that bothers you. Now, as for the display, before we get into that, humor me while I take this screen protector off. You can see it's collected some pretty sizable scratches, which happened early on in the review process, and I just really didn't want to peel that off and expose the actual display. I wanted to wait until my full review is done, so I will go ahead and peel that off now, which can be a little satisfying. Maybe. Wow, satisfying or very difficult. Oh. Okay, where was I? It is a 6.7-inch 1080p AMOLED panel, and some might actually consider this a trade-off because no, there is no 2K or 4K resolution on the display here. But honestly, in my daily use, this was a non-issue. It's sharp, it's colorful, it's pretty bright outside actually, 1300 nits peak brightness. Also 120 hertz adaptive refresh, which in my experience goes a longer distance in visual satisfaction than a 4K phone display. Nothing put a very nice looking panel on this phone, and this, I believe, is a trade-off worth making. Now, the Nothing Phone 2A runs Android 14, and I actually have the latest update, Nothing OS 2.5.5. Design language, as you can kind of see here in the settings, really dot matrixy in a few different places. But from an update standpoint, the 2A doesn't go crazy on promising its longevity. You're going to get 3 years of major OS updates, 4 years of security updates. And, you also have to figure that low to mid-range devices are already a bit hampered by kind of lesser powered internals. Class-leading update promises are harder to commit to on hardware that's already underpowered at launch, and more on that in a second. Now we got to talk about the glyphs, of course, because the Nothing Phone 2A does include what they call the glyphs. Those are those lights that I lit up there. And in fact, I can go into settings really easily and turn this on just by holding the torch button. And poof, we've got them lit up, as you can see here, 3 different zones. It's stripped down to just those 3 on the back. Considering these glyphs are absolutely unique to nothing, this bit of a sacrifice is definitely well chosen, in my opinion. I question whether you can find another $350 device that has this LED flashing notification system on it, and you aren't going to be able to do that. Really, the 3-light system is every bit as useful as the predecessors that have more lights, with some caveats. First, it's not quite as interesting compared to the Nothing Phone 2, which is more like a symphony of light. On the 2A, it's just these few light bars. And depending on what you're doing, they blink and they bloop in different ways, but the utility is pretty much the same. And then some people simply aren't going to use these glyphs for much more than a ring light or a notification alert. And that's totally fine, in my opinion. You don't need to use glyphs for all of its capabilities in order to find them useful. I always had the DND mode, the Do Not Disturb mode on, which I found pretty helpful. Phone calls and important notifications would light up these glyphs when the 2A was face down on a table. And it definitely caught my eyes, as it's designed to. And I found the use of the glyph torch, which is what I'm showing off right now, in place of the flashlight, the LED flash on the device, to be, a little extra when you really need that extra amount of light. They can do other things like music visualization and volume level indicator, but I didn't really need those. All right, let's talk about the cameras. The Nothing Phone 2A has the 2 main lenses on the rear, both 50 megapixels, one main and one ultra wide. Now, they are similar in many ways to the 2 lenses that you have on the Nothing Phone 2, the 2-lens camera system, except that on the 2A, the ultra wide does not have autofocus. So this means you're not going to get any sort of macro on board here. In using the camera system as my daily go-to, my impression is that it's pretty capable with some unpredictable output depending on the lighting and the motion of the subject that you're shooting. Sometimes it was clipping in the lightest areas, and sometimes it was blurring with movement in what I felt like was an otherwise well-lit scene, but colors are pretty well defined usually. The 2 cameras aren't necessarily the best balance on the color spectrum between each other though, so keep that in mind. Overall though, pretty happy with the output, but not pixel happy. Now, speaking of the camera, let's talk a little bit about performance. The chip inside is a custom MediaTek Dimensity 7200 Pro. The company says it's 18% more powerful than the Nothing Phone 1. Do keep in mind that the Nothing Phone 1 was released 2 years ago, so there's that. Now, everyday operation, you would be hard-pressed to find this processor lagging or stuttering on the home screen, settings, that sort of thing. You're just not going to see a whole lot of jitteriness and stumbling throughout the main use of the phone. Games, you're likely to encounter some jumping events. I've got Genshin Impact here, and while I'm by no means like a pro player of Genshin Impact, it's a good test of kind of performance on devices. And considering this is a mid-tier device, things are pretty darn fluid and smooth here, but every once in a while you get a little indication that things are slowing down and kind of chopping, but not very often, not nearly as much as I expected. So that's pretty cool. But where I really noticed the hardware hitting its limits was with the camera operation. We're talking stuttering, freezing, lagging in the operation of both still photos and videos. It didn't happen every single time, but it definitely happened enough to know that it wasn't a total fluke. For example, I took a few photos of my girls at the dining room table. On the last pic that I took, the image shown on the display at the time was them in the pose that I was looking to capture. Then the phone froze for about 5 seconds, and 10 seconds later, the pic I found in my camera roll was a blurry photo of the stove, likely the next thing the lens saw once I thought the picture was all finished. So that was a little weird. Another example, I took an HD video of my 2 dogs eating some yummy fish with their meal, and you'll notice here some serious stuttering and a little bit of wonkiness when I switched lenses during the video. Now, in both cases, I'm actually asking a lot of the processor. We're talking about multiple photos in a stream, switching camera modes while recording HD video, multitasking essentially. But this happened with the camera more than anything else on the phone. And that tells me that those of you who prioritize camera performance should actually consider that this might not be the best mid-range choice for camera performance. You're probably going to notice this from time to time. And really, we know this to be true. The Pixel A series always runs away with this category. And my experience with both devices confirms this to be true. Now we got the battery, and it's a 5,000 milliamp hour battery underneath here. I found that to be perfectly ample for my days of use. Never once did I run out of juice. Usually anywhere from 20 to 50% to spare at the end of the day. Mostly I have it off charger at 5 a.m. in the morning and back onto the charger at 9 p.m. at night. And it's also capable of 45 watt wired charging. I was happy. Also, not completely blown away. It just really depended on the day, but mostly I wasn't really concerned about the battery at all, so I'd consider that a win. Now, no question, one of the 2A's biggest assets is its price. Usually you see this class of phone come in around $400 to $500. The Nothing Phone 2A is $349, which is pretty excellent when you're talking a price, considering everything you get in this package. Of course, living in the US, you might have a more difficult time buying or even using this phone. You won't find it in carrier stores, and you can really only buy it through Nothing's developer program. Now, keep in mind, you don't need to be a developer to do this, but it definitely limits the reach of this phone in the US. And it also might have issues depending on the network that you're on. I've been testing it on the T-Mobile network via Mint Mobile. I've had zero issues here in Petaluma, but Nothing did state that the phone has limited 5G band support on T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon. Thankfully, they offer a 14-day return policy if you get one and figure out you shouldn't have. So definitely your mileage may vary when it comes to connectivity in the US. Now, maybe we should talk just real briefly about some of the sacrifices, because like I said earlier, when you're talking mid-range phones and lower end phones as well, you're talking about trade-offs to get to that price point. And so there are a few other sacrifices that I didn't talk about. There is no wireless charging, but I think that's perfectly understandable at $350. Also, only IP54 rated. So splashes of water are okay, but submersion of any kind is not going to give you a very good day. No headphone jack, not that I ever really expect one anymore, and no micro SD card slot, which I feel like is a nice to have, but not necessary at this point. But again, I think these are some pretty solid trade-offs to bring the price into the low point that it is right now. Now, don't get me wrong. For $350, you are getting one heck of a phone that delivers a style that you just don't see at this price point. Purely original, with that LED flare that Nothing is known for. But make no mistake, this is a mid-range device with a processor that you will notice from time to time, and not always in a good way. But overall, I think Nothing has a solid mid-ranger here with the Nothing Phone 2A. And I'd love to hear what you think. So share your thoughts in the comments below. Did Nothing make the right trade-offs to get to this price point? And I promise to respond to you. I'm Jason Howell. Thank you so much for watching my review of the Nothing Phone 2A. We'll see you next time.